along with Greg Johnson, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Our student presenters are Naomi Leach, Ryan Miller, Michaela Anderson, and Kennedy Wilson. And this item is in compliance with Goal Strategic Plan Goal 4, Transformation of Teaching and Learning, Board Goal 1, and Board Policy 6:40.
I also just want to say I see Chloe Leach here too.
Hi, Chloe. And Chloe Lee.
Very excited to hear your presentation.
Just give us a moment here to logistically. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. At various times over the past several weeks, the board has been part of conversations in which a potential racial equity course pilot has been discussed and presented and developed. We know that these conversations go back at least into last year, and from conversations that I've been able to have throughout this school year, we know that this goes back even before that. And so over the past several weeks, we have met to discuss a variety of elements related to this potential pilot. And we have our students here to help us set the stage for what those conversations have involved. And we'll conclude our presentation with a few specific logistics that we are in the process of discussing and vetting and figuring out how they can work for us down the road. So with that said, I am going to turn this over to our students that we introduced just a second ago. Let me get the microphone over to you. You can stand up or you can sit, whatever you want to do. That's all yours. I'll put it over. There we go.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so hi, my name is Naomi, and this idea kind of sprung up from our club SAFE, and we've noticed that when we do discuss race in class, we have students of color who feel that they have to represent their entire race, or white students and staff that feel uncomfortable talking about race. And so with the class that we're trying to pilot, we want to make a productive conversation where everyone you're not going to feel comfortable talking about things that happen and still affect us to this very day. And it affects everyone, not just students of color. So we are trying to make this class to not only be productive, but find better ways to talk about race and go beyond talking about slavery and those type of topics.
Hi, my name is Ryan Miller, and excuse me, but since we have been working on this curriculum and pilot for a while, we've had a few people bring up concerns and just pushback in general, and one of the things were that if we do this class, how would it affect white students or just any student of color, and how will we make this class a place where all students will feel safe, and our solution would be that it would be a student-led class where students can lead these type of discussions with each other and have an open space instead of being talked to, it would be talked with, so we can have this safe space where everyone feels comfortable and they're expressing their beliefs and themselves. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Chloe Leach, and SAFE's goal is to create a curriculum that fosters open discussion on uncomfortable topics and goes deeper than the slavery/oppression topics in class.
So we want to make the curriculum because we want to open up discussions with not just black and white people, but everybody, because, you know, we want people to have a space where they can say kind of like ignorant things and then not be ridiculed for it. We want to give them spaces where they can actually talk and learn and express themselves. And we want minority students to feel empowered and allow, you know, white people to ask those questions and get feedback from their peers. Also, we wanted to make a unit so that people can, you know, not think about like what right now in present day, but like how history has affected us and to this present day, and just trace that back instead of just always tracing it back to slavery. We want to open it up to things that, you know, Muslim students go through, you know, yeah, Asians, all people of color, and even white people. So yeah.
Okay, so, our semester is gonna be repeatable, so like if a student wants to take it again, they can. And, in the course, students will develop a unit and facilitate the presentation of that unit in classrooms of freshmen and sophomores throughout the school. And the topics will be on slurs, identity, and racial consciousness. And the focus will also be on providing a true definition of diversity.
Do you want these to go out now too?
Oh, yeah.
This is additional information and contact for the course.
Thanks.
History teaches us that unity is strength and cautions us to submerge and overcome our differences in the quest for common goals, to strive with all our combined strength for the path to true unity.
So mostly, the five of us have met several times over the past few weeks. Also some conversations with teachers, some division heads, about what this potential pilot next year could really look like. And so what you have up here are the draft logistics that really we brainstormed as a group and are in the process of vetting at this point. The timeline is important. We're talking about a pilot for next year. The reason, of course, this is a pilot is because we are outside the sequence, right, for our course proposals, which already came to the board, as we know, in September and October. And so in order for this to run next year, it becomes a pilot. We've talked about it being potentially a semester course. And the focus will be on working with students in the course to develop a unit of instruction that has already been named that could be facilitated in other spaces within the school. We discussed a variety of models for that. And so we kind of talked about the idea for the spoken word kind of unit that is kind of moved around the class that you might be familiar with. We also talked about leadership launch as a model that is where students are moving into different spaces to support students and work with freshmen in that case specifically. And so what you see kind of is a sample timeline, right, for how that could look. You know, the students work Monday and Tuesday, working on the exact curriculum and reflecting on how previous implementations have gone. And then they work Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to facilitate that with teachers in other spaces. And so there's work that needs to be done in order for this to go. There are other possibilities we discussed too. Since our last conversation too, conversations have come up about our civics curriculum that is out there that we know all seniors are taking. One of the goals that the students had right off the bat in our first conversation was we wanted to make this something that our students would access on a broader scale, right? And so one of the benefits of the civics class is that we know that, you know, our kids are taking that, right? That's a required course across the board. So there are, those types of logistics are things that we still are in the process of vetting and discussing to see how this could play out. And so we've identified a few next steps for how this might look. By end of first semester, identify and begin working with a teacher who can help develop and potentially teach the course. We know that if this is going to be an ongoing course, right, it needs to make the transition to something that a teacher is going to own in subsequent years as the students come and go, right, throughout the institution. And so that transition is necessary, and it's needed fairly quickly. By mid-February, we wanted to develop the course description, the course outline, finalize the logistics that were mentioned on the previous slide. By the end of April, identify the initial cohort of students for next year's course. There has been some conversations recently about potentially even kicking that timeline up, but there are questions with how we can make that work with our registration process that we're going to look at. And then in summer of 2019, develop the course, and potentially we could use summer school as a way to kind of develop it further. If not, certainly summer curriculum hours, which are a common thing to help get that course up and going, and then fall 2019 pilot implementation. So those are the logistics we still have to kind of think through at this point, and the timeline for next steps. So, yeah, we've had a lot of productive conversations so far, and we have a group of incredibly dedicated, thoughtful students ready to help us get this thinking moving along. So I want to thank you very much, and Chloe, and all of you for all the good work you've done in our conversations. So there we go. And I think the last slide is yours too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yes.
here are just like a few conversations that minorities have had with like the idea of like racial equity and growing up with conversations of race and how they felt. How they felt like they were left out of the conversation, and it's two videos. We don't have to watch all of them, but like just a few examples.
My sound is not going to work.
Yes, okay.
Unless you, what you could do is bring the microphone.
We appreciate your patience with our technical difficulties. You know, I don't see some going with it, actually. We have from good word here that it sounds isn't going to work.
Okay, we can go to, yes, and we can go to questions now there on the board.
I have a couple of questions. First, I want to say thank you to our students for taking the time to develop a curriculum, typically the realm of the adults in the building, and I love that this is student-led and student-produced, so I really want to thank you for the time and effort you put in. But I did have a couple questions. In terms of having it for juniors and seniors, if we're really trying to change the culture and the climate of the school, it would seem that we might want to start younger. Why is it for our older students and not for our younger students?
Sorry, that wasn't clear. The junior and seniors are the ones that are going to teach the class, because it would be, like, we thought about that too. We would love for it to be like freshmen through seniors, but it ain't really going to work. Yeah, so we're trying to start with freshmen and sophomores, but it's open for juniors and seniors to help teach the course.
So that's the comparison with leadership and launch. Then,
Yeah,
so
that
the
was
students
the-
are the mentors.
Yeah.
And then my second question was, I don't know what the school code says about this, but if we wanted to make this a mandatory course for students, could we, or are we wed to this statutory language around what classes are required?
Well, the state certainly has required courses, and so we couldn't supplant any of those with this. We have in recent, with the addition of civics and with the course requirements that we already have in place, if we were to add this one into it, we would have to do some studying to figure out the ramifications of what that would mean for what courses students would need to replace with this one when we go that route, right? So of course, we could make, each individual campus can decide, yes, we're gonna make this required, we're gonna make this required, we can do that. we just have to figure out exactly what that means for our students. And so we haven't gone through that process yet. Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm just curious, how many other high schools have had this kind of scenario where students have taken the bull by the horns like this and created a course? Do we know of precedent?
In exactly this way, I don't think I do. Not exactly this way.
There are some examples of some schools in New York, in the New York area that have done something similar to this with the, different focus, not different focuses on the same kinds of things, but tailoring it to their community, so.
And that's an indirect way of complimenting you all as well. I guess that's what I thought the answer would be, or something like that. Thank you, Dr. Moore.
But I can add, just from my own historical knowledge of this group, that they have been working on this for a couple of years, from listening during student-led workshops that happen after school, listening to students, and the demand for more inclusive kinds of conversations where students could feel comfortable. And I am very pleased with how much listening they did, as well as doing a lot of research to make this come to this point. Craig, Jennifer, Tom.
Sure. Again, as everybody, thank you for putting in all the effort. It's really impressive. I did have one question. I'm curious about the statement of the course is repeatable and what you mean and how you would think about managing that.
Like, you know how we said like juniors and seniors can take it, so like if you're a junior and you take it your junior year, you can take it again your senior year, like that. Like it's repeatable for them, like to mentor.
For the mentor.
A mentor.
Yeah, to mentor.
Okay, thank you.
So my question was already answered, so I'm going to say thank you very much to the students for presenting and for being, taking the initiative to bring this forward and having perseverance to make sure that we're actually presenting it to the board and we're hearing you. So I appreciate that, and I really like the aspect that this can be pushed out to all the classrooms, because my concern with the racial equity class is that it's going to be students who want to talk about this. But pushing it out to all students, to underclassmen, I think will really help keep the conversation going and reach some individuals that probably need to have this kind of in-depth conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, my question is, what state requirements are there that we need to know about to be able to add, create a class? Are there any hurdles we need to get over, or do we pretty much have an open plane?
To just simply add a course?
Correct.
No, I mean, every year is, there are a few courses that come through as additions, and so state requirements wouldn't come into play when we're taking a look at adding an elective course, right, that some students would take. No, this would be an elective credit, in that regard. If we wanted to make this a content area credit in some way, then we have to satisfy some specific requirements as far as who's going to teach the course and fitting it into the state required sequence. But for elective course, we don't have any of those hurdles that we have to leap over.
Okay, first I want to thank you for putting in all this time and effort. It's incredibly impressive. I think it's also incredibly important, and I support your efforts. I do have a couple questions, because I'm trying, after reading this and now I'm listening, I understand that you've got this group of leaders that are going to take a course on basically being able to go out into the classrooms and teach it. And the concern I have is that when you go to the classrooms and you're going into these sections, it's a relatively short period of time, I'm assuming, during the course of a semester, if you could hit if you're going to be able to hit every student. So, my concern is that if it's like and I think what is spoken word 2-week kind of thing, is that really enough time to get across the work that needs to be done with everybody in the building?
But, so, our idea was that it would only be that amount just to start off, like a pilot-wise, but actual, like curriculum-wise, it would be a year, like an actual class, like long enough, 2 semesters we would hope for,
Okay,
if
so-
the pilot went
Right,
right.
so when you're looking at the permanency of it, of a class, you're going to be looking at a full semester-long class.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a little confusing, the people getting credit in the, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the credit comes in to the kids who are the leaders and the teachers.
That's right.
All right, but the students are in a class already getting credit for that class, so if it goes into an English class,
That's exactly it.
okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that is it's really worth clarifying. There was some confusion about that even earlier, with an earlier question. And I think there is a course, and during that course, that individual unit that's been moved out throughout the school is going to be developed and worked on and reflected and so on. And it's that course that the unit themselves will get credit for. But that unit they're developing would exist elsewhere in the organization.
I can say something real quick. The one thing I'm noticing is that it's young ladies taking the lead on this, and I know that you've been making efforts, I'm sure, to broaden and to have others, and so I just want to put that out there to anyone who may hear this, to get some guys, get people of other races, et cetera. And by the way, I am preaching to the choir. I know that you know this, and that you're surely striving for this. I'm just putting this out there to the galaxy to know, because what you're doing is terrific. And I just want to single out, I think Michaela, you're the one that said, the ability to say ignorant things and not be ridiculed for it. That's something that is so hugely important in so many areas of our society. So thank you for mentioning that. I think that's something that I know I noted, and hopefully others will take that to heart. In case I said something really ignorant just now, of course.
Just bringing it back to like the guy topic and stuff, and especially because this is about racial equity, so like obviously it's not just black women. We have worked on reaching out to black males and just other males of color. We're still working on that. It's not like we've completely dismissed that idea. It's just we're trying to make sure that we find students that are qualified to, we don't want to just have someone talk about racism and not really understand like the full concept or have something that's like inappropriately said. We want to make sure that this class is constructed in a manner that it won't come across as like we're not, I don't know the word, like we're not for sure what we're doing. This class has to be clean cut and like precise of exactly what we're looking for and exactly what we're trying to teach. So yeah, just putting that out there.
One last question. So, Greg, all right, what's needed from the board?
Well, I think it's clear we have your support. Honestly, I hate to say it this quickly, but we're good. I think moving forward at this point, we have our timeline. We know where we want to go. We have some conversations we need to have in the building and ongoing in order to make this breathable, moving forward. So if additional items come up and we need to bring those back and ask more questions or get more insight from the board, we will do that. But for the immediate future moving forward, I think we're in a good spot. So,
Could I just
you disagree?
request?
We good? Yeah. All right.
Could I just request that on your timeline, I think April was when you were looking at the, kind of having something fairly developed in terms of your plan, if
Mhm.
that could be brought back to the committee just as an update,
Absolutely.
so we get to see you all before you graduate. Thank you very much. Thank you.
many components make up the initial recommendation, which appears to be largely the former sequence 1. And a single component continues to define a former sequence 2, or the pool, or the aquatic center, and other elements of the 4 stories sports complex. For the sake of transparency and clarification, it would be instructive if we knew what specifically was included in each of the components and from which sequence that they originated. Also, the memo and schematic design lacks detail. It would be beneficial for each item to included a full description. For example, component D, all gender toilet room, is it 1 room or is it multiple rooms? Next to component P, 1 through 4, it says classrooms, and in parentheses 64. What specifically would be done to these classrooms? Are they being rehabbed? Are they being moved? Are they being refurnished, painted? What exactly are we getting for the $6 million over multiple summers? In determining needs versus wants, it's important to know what is being proposed for every expenditure so that an informed decision can be made. Lastly, while I would like to more information on the proposed recommendations, I largely favor them. However, I strongly oppose the administration's suggestion that you might want to consider pushing through component D without voter approval. It needs to go before the voters in a referendum. Please, let's not repeat the mistake of the past. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kitty Conklin. I live at 928 North Lombard. In the 5-year financial projection that Todd Altenberg prepared a year ago in October 2017, 2 things stood out to me. The first is that $20 million was to be set aside as, quote, other finances uses in 2019. My assumption by looking at that was that this amount was being set aside for school renovation work. The second observation is that due to continued planned deficit spending along with the $20 million set aside, D200 would need to start planning in 2021 to come to taxpayers for an operating referendum in 2023. By that time, the current reserve would be exhausted relative to fund balance requirements. So fast forward a year to tonight's agenda, which presents a number of documents, especially the renovation recommendations, along with a 5-year financial analysis, which outlines a number of considerations. And yes, I know that a financial analysis is not the same thing as a financial projection. But as I read the documents, I see a few things that I would like to call out. The first one is a spend of $32.6 million is being recommended to start on the renovation work. A recommendation is also made to move $20 million to a capital projects fund. What I'm confused about is whether or not this is a continuation of the $20 million that was called out in the October 2017 5-year financial projection, or is it an additional $20 million? The third item is that historical growth rates of 4.5% for salaries and 3.2% for benefits are identified. That salary increase rate exceeds the actual salary growth rate, which was included in last year's financial projections. Then fourth, the termination of TIFs will result in a net revenue increase to D200 of about $800,000. And then finally, and this is the big one that caught my eye, deficit spending is expected to continue. It is clearly stated on page 7 of the financial analysis document that D200 will have a structural annual deficit of $7 million within 5 years. What it comes down to for me is this, a simple question, which I hope you will begin to discuss in this evening's meeting. When will Oak Park taxpayers be voting on the next D200 operating referendum? Thank you all for all you do to serve our community.
Thank you.
Monica Sheehan.
Good evening. I'm Monica Sheehan, 626 Fair Oaks. 3 years ago today, the community filed the petition for referendum to force the D200 school board to put its non-referendum bonds on the ballot to finance a $37.5 million 15-meter Olympic-sized pool and demolish a 12-year-old garage. Ironically and sadly, not much has changed. You, the school board, will discuss tonight the latest oversized pool proposal, the third such accepted proposal in as many years, and it's the most expensive of them all. Moreover, a conservative $500,000 to $750,000 have been spent since 2013 trying to build a too large pool on a too small campus, a waste of our educational dollars. In Imagine Sequence 2, now called Component D, $65 or $67 million would be spent on demolishing and rebuilding the southeast corner of the structurally sound building to house a pool that is double the size of a standard-sized high school competition pool in a 600-seat natatorium. While Imagine stated that this pool only cost $2.5 million, in reality, Sequence 2 or Component D's entire $65 million or $67 million price tag is an associated pool construction cost. It is cost prohibitive to build this pool within the existing building, based on two estimates of $80 million and $87 million in 2014, while the other elements in the proposed four-story sports complex could be addressed and accommodated through repairs and renovation. There's been no mention of the routine operating and expected maintenance costs for this 17-lane practice pool. They should be discussed and all costs made transparent before any decision is made. The genesis of the Imagine process was the failed pool referendum, and an oversized pool was a predetermined outcome of Imagine. In your newly accepted plan, we have essentially the same pool that was rejected by voters with even more seating, 600 versus 450 seats. Imagine touts its research, yet where's the research that supports the building of this pool and natatorium? Please share it. We know that swimming isn't a federal or state high school graduation requirement, and we know that Illinois has lessened PE requirements, and that will continue to be a trend. We also know that a pool is not a racial equity issue. My friends who are black are disgusted by that implication. The FACO survey is the only study conducted by a professional research firm, and its scientific, statistically significant findings revealed that a pool at the high school was not a priority for our community. Yet the administration ignored this finding and has persisted in trying to force this oversized want and expenditure on our community. More than 1,600 voters have signed an online petition to assert their right to vote in this Capital Works project. We respectfully request that you put any funding for a pool before voters in a referendum. The 40 members of the Imagine Group and the administration do not represent the D200 community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty Bernstein.
Good evening, board, people attending the meeting. I hope everyone is having a good holiday season. There's a recent article in the Wednesday Journal about a senior swimmer who is in her last year at OPRF. She is only the third OPRF girl to win an individual state championship in the school's history, along with other placings with her teammates. In this story, she is quoted as saying, "I am happy how I did. I'm so proud of the team and all my friends who did so well. And it's hard to believe it's over. I feel like just yesterday I was going to my first tryouts as a freshman. One thing I've learned is how to be part of a team that supports each other. I don't think I would ever have been able to find the success I've had the past 4 years without my teammates by my side." To me, this is what an example of a tradition of excellence looks like. Not demolition of a structurally sound building and construction of extravagantly expensive new buildings. It is from the coaches and teachers and staff, and from inside the students themselves that excellence comes, less from what building the students are in. Over the last year, Imagine has developed plans to renovate and upgrade this building. It is a far-ranging plan with much value, but there are components that should not be included. For example, Component D. It should be replaced with a plan that makes more financial sense. It is now in the board's hands to carefully review the imagined plan and take from it not everything proposed, but those things that are best. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone that did not sign up for public comment that would like to speak?
Hi, good afternoon or evening. My name is Margaret Necrocious. I live at 544 Clarence. I'm new to all of this. I actually grew up here in Oak Park in the house that is my address. It was my mother's dying wish that I buy it from her. And so I am raising my toddlers. They are 4 and 2. As I look at what we're facing as a community, I see long-term the inability for people like me to continue raising my kids here. And I grew up here. I went to school here, I went to Longfellow, and I went to Julian. I didn't come here because my father taught at Ignatius, but my brothers went here. So I come here tonight as a concerned Oak Parker, as somebody who wants to live here and somebody who wants to raise my kids here and have them go to a fair, equitable high school. But I feel like if we continue to fund things that don't further the goal, which is education for everybody, things that work for most of the students, not a couple of students, not even 100 of students. It's not equitable for racial equity or gender equity or LGBTQ equity. We have a lot of things to work on, including the ADA things that I've seen in the paperwork. So I come here as a parent, as a concerned younger person who has lots of friends in the community. Across the preschools, this is what we're talking about. And I see in my mother groups online people leaving, and they're leaving because they are scared of what's coming down the pipeline. So I hope we can think about it long term of what this means. And the last comment I'd make is, having grown up here and been through part of this pool conversation for years, reading the Wednesday Journal, because my dad buys us all Wednesday Journal subscriptions, it's gone on really long, and I feel like we've got other things to focus on. So I hope we can move forward, because we got big problems and stuff to work on. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comment? Okay, so I will move to our next item, which is move to approve the minutes of the November 5th, 2018 meeting, and ask for a second.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
I will turn the agenda over to Dr. Pruitt.
Our first agenda item is a presentation of the 5-year analysis. Coming forth to make their presentation, Dr. Robert Rosie and Ms. Cindy Sedor.
Good evening. I was asked to, I guess as was mentioned previously, what I'm going to present is not a 5-year financial projection, but it's set up to address a specific question. And the question is, assuming the following two conditions. One, the district will levy at its maximum allowable growth rate allowed under tax caps, which is for projection purposes 2.1%. And expenditures will grow at historical trend rates. If those two things occur, what will happen to the school district over the next 5 years? So to begin, I'd like to talk briefly about what's happened in the district's recent history. Over the past 6 years, salaries have grown at a rate of approximately 4.5%. That's actually been pretty consistent over the years. Last year, for fiscal year ending 2018, salaries actually grew 4.8%. Employee benefits are all over the place. They're very sporadic, which is not that unusual for school districts. But kind of taking a trend line look at it over the past couple of years, I'm using a growth rate of 3.2%. I will say that other school districts that I work with will use a higher rate in terms of employee benefit growth, but I use the 3.2% rate in this analysis. Purchase services have grown at a rate of approximately 3%. Supplies and materials about 2.7%. And out-of-district tuition was also the expenditure item that has really had some significant movements over the past 6 years. In fact, over the past 6 years, I believe that rate has grown by about 16% a year on average. It grew significantly more than that in 2013 and 14. It was flat in 15, 16, 17, but then last year it grew from $4.4 million to $5 million. So I used a 5% growth rate for that. Capital outlay, I used a flat $4 million annually as it relates to building maintenance, and then $2 million annually as it relates to technology, transportation, and other capital outlay types of expenses. And that's fairly consistent with what's happened historically. The other major event that was just mentioned that will impact the school district is that I have had conversations with the village, and it's currently the intent of the village to have expire both the TIF in the Greater Mull area and the Madison Business Corridor in 2019. Those two areas have grown by $113 million in EAV since their inception, so they've been successful in that metric. Assuming that the district levies to capture that growth, because that's considered new taxable property, the district would generate about $3.3 million annually of new tax revenues. However, the district has received last year and is projected to receive again this year, based on my conversations with the village, approximately $2.5 million. So the net impact, if those two things happen, is that the real estate taxes will increase by $3.3 million. The district will lose $2.5 million of annual TIF surplus. It'd be a positive of $800,000 annually to the school district. That event is embedded in these projections. One of the things, just real quick, that is not embedded in this projection is that at the end of 2017, based on the audits of the TIFs that I saw in the controller's office, there's about $17.3 million of fund balance in these two TIFs. When they expire, if they expired and were distributed to the school district would get around $4 million of that money. I don't know what the intention is of the village for that surplus, whether they plan to distribute that or not. It's separate from the $2.5 million distributions. But in terms of due diligence, I think it's important that the school district maintain communication with the village to follow up on that. Following graph reflects what would happen under the two scenarios that I had mentioned. Annual revenue growth would grow on an average rate of 1.8%. Again, if your real estate taxes, 80% of your money comes from real estate taxes. If your real estate taxes grow by 2.1%, basically 80% of your money grows by 2.1%. The other 20%, which is state and federal revenues, it's unlikely that that would grow. So the blended growth is about 1.8%. The way the money comes in, if you look at the revenue line, is a little choppy, and that's just because the TIF expiration and how that, when that kicks in. In terms of expenditures, if those assumptions hold true with expenditures, even with capital staying level at $6 million, the annual growth rate in expenditures would be 3.5% per year. As a result of that, with expenditures growing faster than revenues, mathematically, you could see that we're in 2018, the audited numbers, or not final audited numbers, but the district did incur, it looks like, another slight surplus in 2018. With expenditure growth exceeding revenue growth, the district would begin deficit spending, and that deficit spending would grow, as mentioned previously, to $7 million by fiscal year 2023. Cumulatively, the annual deficits over those 5 years would be $20 million. So fund balance reserves would drop by about $20 million. My biggest concern is not the $20 million decrease in fund balance reserves, but a structural deficit of $7 million is not sustainable. Then the dotted line I put in there would be what would happen, again, under the hypothetical that there was a levy freeze in all the years. And you could see that that would generate annual deficits of $17 million by 2023. The key takeaways of this analysis are that at best, assuming maximum levies of 2.1% CPI, district revenues will increase 1.8% annually going forward. Assuming that the district's revenues grow 1.8 and district expenses grow at 3.5, the district will exhaust $20 million in fund balance. And again, more concerning to me is that you would have a $7 million deficit, which is unsustainable. It would rapidly decrease fund balance reserves, or would require a very significant operating fund deficit, operating fund referendum to close that gap. If the district elects to freeze future tax levies, the impact would be much more dramatic. And then the final bullet point, which is really kind of, I think, the path going forward, is that to avoid deficit spending, the district must align expenditure growth to revenue growth. That's the key to everything in this district, in my opinion. This would require, 1, a commitment to maximize tax levies, and 2, a commitment to lower expenditure growth rates to that level of growth in revenues. Any questions on this topic?
Rob, just go back a second. I just want to make sure I understand one piece of data, which is right there. Thank you. The top line, is that total expenses, including debt payment and such, when you look at the 3.5%?
Yes.
Okay. So, in fact, if you take out the debt, which is diminished, that number is really north of 3.5.
Absolutely.
And actually north of 4.
Yes. Closer to 4. I don't know if it's north of 4, but it certainly would be closer to 4 than 3.5.
Any other questions at this point?
Just to,
I'm sorry, Tom.
I mean, I don't know if it's a question, but I mean, I haven't asked that, as a follow-up, because I agree with what he's presenting. I think it's very important data, and the whole point of needing to be able to balance is critical. And talking at a high level is easy, but the ask is that we need the administration to come forth with a plan that breaks it down into the components of, and the buckets that were up there, or in some cases, I would say some sub-buckets of what we need to do in each area to achieve that goal, because otherwise it's just a big number that doesn't get us anywhere. Because in my opinion, our whole, if we're going to extend out when we need more money from the taxpayers, and we're going to invest in our facility, both of which are desires, then dead on. That's the critical component, and we've got to demonstrate the ability to do it, but it can't just be a single number we're flying around. It means that, okay, we've got to say that this thing needs to be here, and what the formula needs to be. So I don't know if we can, how to frame that up as a follow-up, but
I'm trying to capture what you're saying. That we come forward with a plan of what we need, what we as administration is recommending that we do as it relates to each of the areas identified here, or were you talking about the line items within the next one? Talking about each of the areas.
I would really go back to the second slide that had, where we've seen the rates of growth. We know that, and I think Rob's number is, even out-of-state tuition, out-of-district tuition, the 5% is a very narrow window. We know that that recipe up there, those numbers, will not work.
Right, so.
It needs to be less than those numbers.
This is clear because we're already having those conversations.
Perfect. That's,
So, is part of your question, Tom, when the board will be apprised of that, or am I overreaching?
asking, when would we see it, yes?
That is the ask.
I don't have the answer to that, so we will get to see how soon we can bring it.
So the out-of-district tuition, I was thinking about that as Tom brought it up before. To what degree do we have control over that? Because the sense I have is that things happen and it's a necessary thing to accommodate situations involving students who need to go out of district. Do we have a cap? What kind of, is there a cap that we can have on that?
It becomes difficult when it is aligned to a student's disability and the services that are required to put a cap, because by law, we have to be in compliance with an IEP. We can look at how that's done and how often, the frequency of that, and a decision being made, but to say we're gonna cap and you can't spend over this amount would put us out of compliance.
Okay, all the more reason to get the other things that we have some more control over, get those in control. And this kind of addresses a question that someone had posed earlier during the public comments. Rob, if we are able to accomplish what you're suggesting, which is to have our budget be, not deficit spending, would we be able to, from 2023 to indefinitely push off a potential referendum?
I think well, first of all, let me back up for 1 second. So not embedded in these projections, and this is an important point that has to be made, is a shift of TRS pension costs to school districts, a forced property tax freeze, and things such as that. So certainly if that happens, those are things that are kind of beyond your control, that may force something to happen that you don't want to happen. But I think that it's appropriate to make a legitimate, if the district makes a legitimate effort, and again, something, if there's special ed costs going up and there's nothing you can do about it, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think that I think that there's a possibility, without getting deep into your expenditure budget yet, that the district could have the capability of aligning revenue growth to expenditure growth, and if it does that, it never needs to go to referendum. Mathematically, your fund balances will never decrease for operating deficits, and then you'd only be making decisions on whether to use fund balances for capital projects.
Rob, thanks for putting this together. I think it's really insightful. I think it helps understand how the dynamics work here. A couple, and I really want to second Tom's comment that I really think that I really would like the administration to come forward with, okay, so if balanced budget is gold, what's the implications? What's the implications on these major buckets for us? And in one in particular, I know that we often talk about the benchmark for the benefits. We did benchmarking on benefits earlier this year to understand what benefits are happening in other districts. We've done benchmarking in a number of these places. guess I would like, as part of this, to understand a benchmarking of what's our special ed cost versus other districts around special ed costs. I understand the dynamics of exactly what we're talking about, but I'd just like to know where we are relative to others. And that's the only additional thing.
No, that helps, benchmarking of these figures definitely help put a more laser focus on area. I mean, there's obviously other things that could be out there, but that's certainly an important metric to analyze, for sure.
I just wanted, on the point of the special ed, because it came up with Craig and with Matt, is that, you know, we have an exceptional special ed program, and one of the things, to Joylen's point, is that to be in compliance, there are families that move here because they know we have a strong special ed program. So I understand wanting that work to be done to have a comparison, but I'm not sure how, unless it's a comparison with other districts with as strong of a program, because that's a big reason for, you know, families that have kids with special needs come here. So I don't know what that number would be. Just another aspect.
I understand, but I also think it's kind of a choice, and I want to know what that choice costs us as a district.
I don't understand what's the choice.
It's a choice to offer a really, really good special ed program. I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't. I just want to know the implications of that choice in terms of financial.
All right, thanks. Fred, Sarah.
So, Cindy and Rob, I want to thank you for this. This is a lot of good information. I kind of align myself with the things that Tom, Craig, and Matt have said. I'm very interested to see how we sustain a balanced budget over a long-term period. Because, I mean, the inherent nature of a school system is, in Illinois, is that we're tax capped at CPI. However, the majority of our expense, which is tied into human capital, grows at a different rate. And so my biggest concern is how that can sustain itself over a long period of time. If we can do it, you know, fabulous. But that's really, you know, where I want to kind of focus in and see how we can do this, you know, over 10, 12, 15 years, and push our operating needs out. So that's kind of my first comment. My second comment is that I also, over the term that I've been on the board, and even before when I watched the board, I felt that there was that we have made investments that will show up as expenses, but won't grow at that rate because, for example, we added a PSS team. So that was an incremental addition back in 2016, or whenever the first year of that team was. That's not going to grow. We're not going to go to a 6th team, 7th team, 8th team, and that's not going to grow over time at this point in time. Our projections and enrollments seem to be relatively flat, so we don't see a need in the near term for an additional PSS team. And I think we've added some other positions as well, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years, and it'd be interesting to go back and see which those are and if they could be somehow indexed out of this to get a real growth number.
Yeah, I mean, I think you stated it very well. I mean, essentially, the task at hand is assuming 2.1 CPI, is that, you know, can we grow expenditures at 1.8% or less without impacting student learning? And that involves financial people looking at it, and it involves academic people looking at the impact. And combined, if it could be done, could there be efficiencies developed? You know, that's something that I think is the next major task of the finance area of the school district.
So I have a question that, I'm just looking at our policy manual and I'm looking at 4:10 balanced budget within the definition of the school code. How is that different from the common term, the common idea of a balanced budget?
Stop.
Okay.
I think most of my comments have been said. Thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. I think we've talked many times, I think as a board, we're all in agreement about the need for cost containment and having a balanced budget. And, I understand that the finance department has been going through some changes recently, but I do think, we need to hear specific plans from the administration about how we're going to accomplish that. But that said, I just wanted to echo Jackie's comments about the special education department, with the understanding that, of course, that is where we're seeing these increases, but I just think we should be careful about how we're talking about those students. They deserve the best education. SPED students are, our students. So we just need to find ways to control cost and not, as you said, impact student learning, especially those students that need it the most.
That's great. And I think within the category of special education for school districts that have looked to reduce special education costs, kind of the question is, can they deliver the services as good or better internally rather than having the students go outside the district? And that's the question. I don't have the answer, but I think that's the fair analysis. So never compromising that the student has an IEP or whatever, and the student has specific needs. But is there a more cost-effective way to deliver special ed services, just like is there a more cost-effective way to deliver all other services in this budget for school district?
So I do want to just circle back and get a sense from the board, so as a way of giving some information to the administration as to when, some time frame of seeing the requests tonight in terms of a more defined look at cost containment. Anybody?
Tomorrow morning?
Can I make this? I was actually
Monday.
just real briefly. I was actually talking to Mike right before the meeting. We were talking about this a little bit. I think it's kind of based on prior experiences. At this point in time, you kind of look at it in two phases. Number one is, are there low-hanging fruit types of reductions that could be made for next budget? So those are things that you'd want to know as you're starting the development of the budget, which is as early as this spring. And then there's systematic changes and more longer-term impact kind of changes that maybe won't impact this next budget, but will impact the following budget. So I think that the work would definitely want to start right away for things that you would want to address in next budget. There may be some things that are more systematic or require more evaluation or involve personnel or something like that of significance that you might want to have a more expanded process involved.
So I think the answer to the question is what I would say, which is it needs to precede our next budgetary cycle with enough time that we can, say this seems like a plan that we, can get behind.
Also, too, the only thing I was going to say is that we're also starting our budget much earlier this year. So that is the one thing we will be able to see. Sometimes we were running it and it was running later and we're getting closer to the budget time. So we're actually starting when we come back in January. And we're going to start going through all the budgets. Everybody's going to sit down, they're going to go through every single thing they have that we're looking at. And we're going to see what needs to be cut out of their budgets.
So the look at the budget is with the goal of having a balanced budget.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
We also want to come forward, we heard the next item, that is the tax levy item. We've heard from the board in our previous discussions to to come back with at least two, we have two considerations. So we're going to present those to you tonight. The item, and then we'll ask you at the December board meeting to make a formal decision on what we are going to levy. This item is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 6, Strategy 3, and District Policy 4:20, 4:40, and 4:150.
So when we were at the board meeting on November 15th, we had talked
You
about.
probably need to pull the mic, because you have a soft voice. I know you have a cold, pull it a little bit closer.
Okay, that good? Better? Better? Okay. So at the November 15th board meeting, we had talked about the levy, and we had looked at the projects coming up, and also our facilities plan. And the one thing that we had talked about was going to the CPI for this year, and that's 2.1. So we came back with two options this time. And what it was is, we looked at the one, and it was gonna be $68,036,000. We looked at another avenue of, because of a lot of the construction projects that are being looked at, that actually taking and maxing out the building fund. So we changed, and that is an option 2, where we have put in $1.6 million, so we can max out that instead of doing transfers. And again, the dollar amounts have not changed. We just lowered the total amount, I should say. The education went down to $50,946,000, and then the building fund went to 12. I'm sorry. No, that's not on that one yet. And then the building fund went to 12 million. We were talking back and forth about a different option, and we actually had a third option to come up with, and that is taking and putting into life safety, maxing that out at $2 million. So you don't see that there, but it is a third option to think about, because we have life safety projects. So instead, again, of transferring, it makes sense to put the money into that account. And what we did is, we had lowered the education fund to $48,946,000, the building fund to $12 million, and then also to the life safety to $2 million for this levy. What it would do is it would lower the education by 3.6. It would increase the building by 1.6, and the life safety to $2 million. All three of them, the total would be exactly the same. It's $68,036,000.
This is more of a statement than a question, but one of the reasons that I like the transfer, I like using the building maintenance fund and the life safety fund is transparency in levy, so that we're essentially levying for those funds that we know that the dollars are going to be coming out of, versus sort of historically using the ed fund as the bank in terms of levying totally into the ed fund and then transferring out. So this is just getting into better capital planning and better management of how we manage our finances in line with our tax levy, in line with our needs.
Correct, exactly. Also, too, the other thing that we had wanted to talk about, because along with the CPI, there also became the property tax grant that Rob has the right hand to the state of Illinois that he's going to talk about.
But before I get into that, another effect of the putting $2 million in the life safety fund is that the district has about $2.9 million in that fund at the end of June 30th. By transferring this money into the fund, the life safety fund will now contain approximately $5.1 million, which will be the amount of money of life safety projects that are currently outstanding on the building project list. So what that would mean in supporting putting the $2 million levy into that fund is that the district would be using fund balance reserves to address the life safety projects rather than bond proceeds. So that's another, that would be for this round of life safety work. So that would be something that to factor in as well, that you you wouldn't be needing to issue bonds for that $5.1 million in life safety bonds. You would in essence be using fund balance reserves to address that.
I guess I'm trying to understand, because now it seems as though option 3, which is the one we didn't see, is the one that we're talking about the most, and I'm just would like a little more information about the rationale or the data that supports the 5.1 million in which costs and life safety expenditures it covers, because we don't have any of that information.
Sure. So when the financing plans and were discussed around the Imagine projects, there was always this $5.1 million of life safety work that we knew about had to be addressed. It was not portions of it may through overlap be contained in the Imagine plan, but it primarily sat in the list of projects that needed to be addressed in the district facilities. The primary one is, Mike, what's the primary, is it the sprinkler systems or?
No.
Or some systems?
It is some systems, you're right. So it's the enunciation systems for lockdowns and fire alarms, and it's also the whole fire alarm system. And I'm going to look to Fred at this. That's about, where are you, Fred, 3 million? 3.5 million for that. That redoes the whole fire alarm system. And the enunciation system, which is used to, when there's a lockdown or any type of an emergency in the building. We've got an old system here that's based on an old intercom system that's way out of date. So we were cited for that. This is to replace that system throughout the building. The other monies that are in there are really items that are, there is an overlap in Imagine, and we don't, because of the way Imagine was done, we don't know exactly what that overlap is, but we will have visibility to that. So we're not going to be spending all of that in one time. We have 5 years that's been submitted to the board, to the state, and the state has approved that. That's our plan. We have 5 years to execute that. The initial list was, I'm looking for it in the board minutes. It was actually presented. I will resend it out for us to take a look at.
So I remember that list. I'm trying to have the aspect that's the overlap with the Imagine.
That we won't know until we get to the next phase of the Imagine plan, because what it does is identifies the way the door, it's a lot of the door frames and things like that. My sense is not my sense, we absolutely, when we redo those classrooms, we will take care of those things. So, but to what extent, was it 100% of those things? I don't know exactly what that amount is. One way or the other, we're going to have to do that work. And most likely, if the board approves that the phase that the administration is putting forward, the vast majority of that will most likely be handled through that work. We'll know more when we get to the next phase, but that's the gut feeling we have right now.
So, Mike, whether we do that work within an Imagine project or we do that work as a project specifically under a life safety thing, it's still life safety dollars.
Yes, it is.
But if it's life safety dollars and we're saying that means it doesn't come out of the projected budget for Imagine.
It comes out of the same budget, it just is in a different fund.
Well, that's easy for you to say. My point is that in terms of transparency, it starts to feel like, we're, and this is just my not being a finance person, wanting to be clear that when we make a statement that part of it will overlap with the Imagine budget, we're being clear that that this money, we're not adding money to something, oh good, we freed up $2 million, now we can use that on something else. Just want to be clear that we're all on the same page with that means.
Not at all. No.
Thank you. Fred?
Yeah, I'm trying to just wrap my arms around the difference between levying, and specifically, we talk about life safety, is levying that to build the fund up to be able to pay for life safety versus issuing bonds and paying for it over a longer period of time. It seems that to me a life safety issue is so a long-term capital investment that would lend itself towards bonding rather than taking it out of an annual tax levy.
Well,
So I'm just looking for the philosophical issues.
So if it was a bond issue, if it was done through a life safety bond issue, that would be an additional tax on the taxpayer. So what we're saying, or what this proposal is saying, is that rather than borrowing money and paying interest on the money and levying taxes to pay the principal and the interest on the money, the district would use $2.9 million of life safety money that's sitting in the fund right now, plus $2 million of your 2.1% levy. So it's reallocating the normal tax levy into the life safety fund to cover the projects rather than an additional bond issue. And just the other component that goes along with the tax levy is in terms of impact of the taxpayers, and it goes hand in hand that the board's going to be asked to consider at the December meeting is the property tax relief grant that we discussed before, which if the board approves the application and if the application is approved, will lower the tax levy by $5.8 million after they extend this tax levy that you're going to be asked to approve. And just for reference, it's been brought up before in two different pieces, but in terms of impact of the homeowner, because I know that's a relevant dynamic to this, is that the CPI increase that you're being asked to approve, whether it's in the ed fund or partially in the other funds, it's the same dollars. That CPI increase will cost a $400,000 homeowner about $68 for the year of additional taxes. The tax, because it's about $1.4 million of additional taxes. The tax relief that would go concurrent with that is a $5.8 million reduction in your levy. That will generate about a $280 decrease in the taxes. So the net impact of your tax levy, if you do increase the tax levy by 2.1% and you decrease the tax levy through an abatement of $5.8 million, is a decrease to a $400,000 homeowner of around $213 in taxes.
And that tax reduction will be realized in
the fall tax bill
of 2019.
2019.
So that's the 2018 tax bill.
Right. The spring is going to be the same no matter what you do because it's 55% of the prior year.
And can you procedurally, the steps that need to happen, you know, I mean, we had talked last time, but at our board meeting on December the, whatever it is, 20th?
Yes.
Yes.
Then that will be a motion, a specific line item project.
Yeah. That will
In
be-
addition to the letter.
Yes, there'll be a specific line item.
And that
The
gives us-
application date, I
that
think,
meets
is
the time
January
requirements?
7th.
Yes, it has to be filed by January 7th.
And I would just ask that when we include that, the explanation that we're giving about what what you get back in terms of for taxpayers, that all be, I don't know, it's maybe 2 memos, but if there's some slide that can show how that, the offset, I think it would be appreciated by the community as well as the board. Any other questions?
And just one last thing on this, on the tax, what do you call it? The tax grant. That grant goes, then is not a one-time thing. We're gonna abate taxes at $5.8 million.
So
We get a reimbursement on the grant, all right, and then that reimbursement, as I understand it, goes on from year to year to year.
So the state requirement, that's a great question. The state requirement, oddly enough, is just that the school district has to abate one time. And if they abate one time, the grant becomes the grant. So if you abate $5.8 million in taxes on May 20th, is what the state's saying, you will get $3.8 million. That's the relief grant. You're gonna get, they're gonna subsidize $3.8 million of your tax relief. Then, as long as the state continues to increase, to not cut funding to education, you're gonna get that approximately $3.8 million annually. If it's the intent of the Board of Education, and I attended 2 meetings with ISB 2 Fridays ago, side by side, and that's absolutely the case. If it's the intent of the Board of Education, which I'm recommending to the boards I work with, to provide the tax abatement so that it's revenue neutral to the district. In other words, if you're going to get $3.8 million in tax relief every year, then you should be providing tax relief every year. But if you get $3.8 million under a revenue neutral scenario, the abatement would be equivalent. So I'm recommending to school districts not trusting the state of Illinois is that if you get the abatement, then the abatement that you get, you consider, if you get the grant money, then the grant, and you receive it, then you consider abating that at the next available opportunity as a strategy. But that's something that the boards of education will be deciding every year going forward. For this specific board meeting, it's just the one abatement of $5.8 million, and then next year you'll make the same consideration depending on what the state does.
Yes, a question I have on this. We are eligible and, as you've said, likely to be successful because of our ranking near the top of, in our tax rate. My question is, are there any, potential changes such that if we do we have to maintain that ranking, or if we were to fall from number 9 to number 22, would we lose eligibility, or is it just?
It's based on your current ranking.
Okay. This is the time you want to be ranked, I
Yeah.
So it's just based on that.
If I could, real quick, right, I would think all the school districts are going for this that are eligible.
That's what I'm recommending. I mean, it absolutely makes sense.
There's 21 overall, and we're...
No, there's $50 million of money that's set aside for this. And if every school district from top to bottom does it, it goes to like 21. There probably won't be all districts. I don't think, there's some districts that I don't think it's on their radar. There's some districts that don't understand it, and there's some districts that maybe don't care.
Are we number 15 on the list?
I don't have it with me.
Oh, 12.
12.
Okay, well, we'll ensconced in that.
Based on everything ISB's told us multiple times, that if you apply, again, you'll know on January 31st if you got the grant. And if you get the grant on January 31st, then you have to abate your taxes by March 30th.
We get the check in April.
And you get the check in May. And the money's set aside, so the first payment's for sure guaranteed.
So does everyone feel informed enough for our board meeting?
So I'm looking at the team now. Are we clear which option we're bringing back based on the board discussion for the levy?
I'm only in an assumption level. I'm assuming that it's gonna be the option 3.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we came back with the right option.
Is that consensus here? That's the assumption I was going, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item, entire item to you, but I am going to do so today. On November 15, 2018, the Imagine OPRF Work Group made its recommendation to the board for a long-term facilities master plan. The board accepted those recommendations. It is important to note that a master plan is not a construction project where designs and financing of every portion is done at the start. Instead, a master plan is a living document that should be reviewed and modified as the impact of early projects is assessed, school needs change, and funding becomes available. In accepting the long-term facilities master plan recommendations, the board accepted the facility needs that have been identified by the Imagine team. Acceptance did not commit the board to undertaking any of the work nor the recommended sequencing of the projects. Now the Board of Education must decide what, if any, portion of this master plan is to be implemented, when to schedule the work, and how to fund it. So attached, the board received a list of 2 projects that could potentially be done. The initial recommended component has an estimated total project budget of $631,500 and includes renovation, construction, and the following. I'm reading this because there was a piece that I left out. There are 76 general education classrooms that will either be remodeled or refurbished to meet ADA and classroom instructional needs. Classroom kitchen, laundry areas, sensory rooms, and ADA compliant restrooms for the special education team, which stands for transitional education, and with access to the mainstream program. The first phase of the student commons, which would include the east first floor, the second floor, and third floor. The piece that was also left out was the Student Resource Center. It is encompassed in the cost and was in the diagram that the board received, but we forgot to put that line in there. But that was the Student Resource Center and the library. The first phase, the main interest, all gender restrooms, and that would include looking at all of our restrooms for renovation and looking at every single restroom, not making them all gender, but just looking at all of our restrooms. The 3 science labs, the Husky Pup daycare facilities, and ADA compliant elevator in the north end of the building. We use the term components. Components has been systemic throughout this process, and each component has been identified by an alpha letter that pertains to sequence, all the sequences. We chose not to use sequence 1 or the term sequence 2 because there were some changes. For example, the green roofs were removed. And we did not want to send the misconception that if we said sequence 1, it would be implied that we were leaving the green roofs in. While all these components address important facility needs, only the team items address issues that were identified as most urgent. And that was based upon the research that was done, and we received a compilation of the sequences that met the facilities needs and the sequences that met the urgent need. So this was based primarily on the physical condition of those facilities. The initial recommended component will have the most significant impact on students in terms of classroom spaces, ADA accessibility, special education, and collaboration spaces, etc. Additionally, consideration was given to maintaining the district's debt-free status on the initial projects. And these decisions were based upon ongoing conversations we heard with the board, that we heard through our community engagement activities and through public comment. However, we felt it important to present to the Board of Education those items that were indicated as an urgent need. And that's the east side of the field house, which is made up of component D, which includes physical education spaces and offices, the dance studio, a weight room, locker rooms, and yes, the pool. If the board wishes to commit, however, to rectifying and addressing the most urgent facilities need, you could consider component D. And you also see that we listed as a future component within the diagram that you gave, and that is what is directly tied to the previous item, charging the administration to come back with a plan on how we can fund future projects. So that if you looked at Fund D, which has a total budget of $65,367,600. That would include, as I said earlier, the pool replacement, which was deemed urgent, the locker rooms, which were urgent for boys and all gender, the ADA compliant elevator in the south end of the building, which was considered urgent, and the PE offices and spaces, the dance studio, the multi-court gymnasium, and the weight room. With several of the items listed in component D as identified as important rather than urgent, the most cost-effective way to complete component D would be to do all the work at once. So we knew that we'd be asked, why would you not take different components out? But the most cost-effective way was to do all. At this time, however, it is the administration's recommendation that the board authorize us at the December 20th board meeting to issue a request for qualifications or an RFQ for design services only for our initial recommended component, with a total project cost of $32,631,500. Doing this project would have, again, the most significant impact on students in their classrooms while taking into consideration the district's financial uncertainties, as you heard with the 5-year analysis, previous board discussions, the size and scope of component D, and community input. And so we'll be coming back next week with a recommendation to do the initial recommended component at the cost indicated, and we will be recommending that those funds come out of our fund balance.
Just to start, the RFQ that you're requesting, what's the intended outcome of that? What will we get?
We would get design, construction of phase, the design of phase, the sequence we're proposing. I'm making sure I'm saying that correctly. Come on. That would include all of the components of design in our initial recommended component.
Right, so going out to RFQ, you'd be requesting, not proposals, qualifications from design services from architecture firms. And you would go through then an interview process, shortlist interview process, and you would select an architect to move forward with those major capital projects. You wouldn't actually move forward with designing those projects until you've actually completed a contract with that architect. So by going through the RFQ process, you still haven't committed necessarily to doing those projects until you actually sign a contract with that architect or letter of understanding.
So after the RFQ process, then we would be committing design dollars specifically.
Design dollars specifically. Then they would go through a design phase, approximately a year based on the size of the projects. And actually, the projects recommended would happen over several years, because some of them are intended to be summer projects that are happening over several years. So there might be several different design phases within that overall lump sum of projects that you're committing to. And not until you actually go out to bid and then accept those bids are you actually committing to any of the construction dollars. But yes, the $32 million includes both design services and the construction dollars and all incidental expenses associated with those projects.
But the 32 is just an estimate, right?
The 32 is just an estimate, correct.
How long will this sequence component one, sorry, I'm trying to remember the right language. How long will this take? You said several summers, but.
So all of the classrooms, it's 76 total classrooms. Those were intended to be done broken up into possibly 4 sequential summers worth of work. So potentially as long as 4 years. You might be able to compress that slightly once you get into the details of it. But that was the initial intention, and I think that was the longest standing item. The larger projects of the library was estimated, I believe, about, how long was that? 14 months. 14 months. So that would be a substantial construction project. Once that is completed, then you can backfill the existing library in this space with the additional classroom spaces. And then that section, I believe, was 6 months. This one, yeah. I can't see. Actually, no, we had indicated that that could be a summer project. So that would happen after that initial 14-month project.
So we're talking 3 to 4 years to actually complete all the work in this package, is that correct?
Yes, probably closer to 4 because you have the initial design phase, which is going to happen over approximately 9 months to a year.
Thank you. I have more questions.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. A couple questions. So the RFQ, I mean, we already hired an architect, so this is a separate RFQ just for this project. I mean, I still have
That's how we initially went into the process, because we were behind schedule with the architect of record, and that started after we went down and started this process. So yes, you're talking about a separate process.
the selection and the management of the construction, the actual construction phase of it, how does that work? Will we be hiring a construction management company? Will we be hiring a general contracting company? How does?
Some districts do that traditionally. It's my understanding the district has served as its project manager.
But not for some, I don't think, I mean, we haven't had a project this extensive for 50 years, so the question is, you know, is that something that we would handle in-house, or is that something that, I mean, because this is pretty substantial.
I don't think we're prepared to answer that yet. I think your points are well taken. I think we have to get into the process, see what the architect brings to the table. And sometimes the architects provide services very similar to that. Sometimes we may want to contract for that on our own versus through the architect. So there's a lot of different ways we can go on this. And going a priori, I don't think I've got a point of view on this, but I would say I'm the most educated on this right now.
And there are also some all-comprehensive agencies that do the architectural design and do the project management, which is what you were saying.
And then one final question is, the recommendation is to spend the $32.5 million out of fund balance. Why all out of fund balance? Why not bond?
We were trying to, because we know we're going to have future projects, and we were trying to hold off having an impact on our community as it relates to taxing them to pay off those bonds.
Thank you.
Yeah, just want a quick point of clarity. Is it, so summer of 2020, would that be the earliest that the classrooms, any kind of initial tangible change occurs?
That's just a year.
Because I just want to make clear, so it's not this coming summer.
Because that's the earliest you could have any of those classroom renovation projects, but it wouldn't include, you wouldn't have the construction of, say, the major library.
Right, that takes 14 months from that point, perhaps, if it starts next summer.
It's when the construction is 14 months.
So like, it's the 2021-22 school year is where there might be some more, the sense of, okay, we see what's been happening all this time, okay.
And I do want to note that when we talk about the cost, all that cost does not come out at one time. There's the cost I think you articulated too, that was for the initial phase design and so forth. So that the money we're asking to be allocated is distributed over time. And the bulk of it, my understanding, is the end of the project. But it's basically, we're asking the board to earmark the money.
I have what's perhaps a naive question, but we just had a presentation about a capital fund of 20 million. Why aren't we saying to put the initial 32 million straight in there?
Well, if on the 20th, when we ask the board to approve that, we will take it and ask to put it in there, but we want to earmark that specifically. When we come back on the 22nd, the 20 million is separate from what we are asking for to do the first initial component. The 20 that was earmarked or identified with the 2013 FAC, we want to begin to put into capital for future projects.
Oh, so that's not anticipated for this project, okay.
Joylyn, earlier you mentioned mentioned that in 16 to 18 months, you think you can have a idea about donation, fundraising project. Wondering if you could talk about that more and about the comment in the memo that we should be taking into consideration or think about addressing component D. There's no time frame in the comments, so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Our recommendation as administrative team would be for component D to be the next phase of work.
After this 4 years.
After this 4 years, because that allows us the opportunity to, as we said, start looking at the balanced budget, to levy, we have the 20 million set aside, and to get outside donations, private donations to do that. To put that on now, the district would have to go into debt if we took on component D as well as the initial component that we're recommending, because that would be close to $100 million.
So
So the time frame was a guesstimate time frame, that's why it wasn't put in here, so that we can, as we start to investigate private donations, we can set a goal for where we want to be, but we don't want to shortchange ourselves on hitting that goal. We also want to begin to build a reserve in terms of the levy and in terms of how we underspend with our budget, starting with that balanced budget concept.
I understand. I mean, I think I'd like for us as a board, I think, to have a conversation about if we're willing to make that commitment, because I hear you saying that that is your vision for addressing component D, once this project of the initial recommended components have been completed. But I think as a board, we haven't made that commitment, and I think we need to have that conversation, as uncomfortable and unpopular as it may be. It's not just what's politically popular, it's what's in the best interest of our students. And we've heard from our students, and based on all the research that we've heard from Imagine, that, I know the price tag is high for that end of the building, but that's because that's where our most urgent needs are. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that. I agree, I'm in support of these portions, because I do think it will have the most immediate impact, and having being in ADA compliance and having renovated classrooms are all really important. But for me, the PE spaces are learning spaces, and we've heard that from our students. We don't have to talk to just Black people we may know to know that pools and the PE spaces are an equity issue. We have the research from Imagine that talked about the 669 students who were asked about what portions of the building don't work for them. And it is, pool is number 3 for our students of color. For African American students, pool is number 4. For all students, pool is number 3. So we know that the PE spaces that it is an equity issue for our students.
And you are absolutely correct. That's why we felt it important to at least bring it forward so that the board could see it and identify that it is listed as an urgent need. What we as administration, that is articulated in the memo, took into consideration what we also heard the board say was critical. Classroom spaces, ADA, least amount of impact on the taxpayer, common spaces. So we were trying to take what we heard and make it hit all of those key pieces, but we knew that we would not just come in here with just that and you not know what was listed as urgent. At the end of the day, the board has the decision. Whatever decision the board lands on, we as administration will implement. That's why we felt it important to also give you component D, but tell you what we took into consideration. And that was not to minimize the urgent need. That's why we felt it important to say this was urgent.
Question, I think Rick, you're probably the most equipped, maybe Michael, and the elements of the facility of the south end of the building with the locker rooms in particular, the boys' locker room, and there was the other mention of the other locker rooms. What's the cost for that component?
I don't have an individual line item for that.
Because I know that
specific cost.
it's more cost effective to do everything all at once if we agree that that's all that we want to do, though I don't think that we're going to reach that agreement tonight or anytime soon for D. But to me, another related question would be renovating those those spaces, say the boys' locker rooms as an example, would that cause a domino problem in terms of sequencing?
So the large problem with the south end of the building is that, for the most part, you can't meet the needs within the spaces that they currently occupy. You can't renovate the boys' locker room in the space that it currently occupies because it has physical barriers in which you can't get past. You can't provide adequate ventilation there because you don't have the head height to get ductwork into those spaces. So it's not a simple matter of just taking the existing shell, gutting it, and renovating it, because you would put a lot of money into a space and still not satisfy the need and solve the issue that you're trying to resolve. So renovation of those spaces in place is not really a viable option.
So sticking solely on that part of the, say the boys' locker rooms, I know there's more, is what's required for that item, for that section of the building to be raised, to be knocked down?
So based on this recommendation and looking at all the issues and conflicting needs in that area, that is exactly what was recommended, is to remove that section of the building and replace it because you can't meet the needs within the existing spaces and the sizes that they're at.
So it feels like work on that in the building, whatever it may become, needs to be done as a cohesive whole and not piecemeal.
Right, right.
Wherever we arrive in terms of the scope.
Right, because to try and do that incrementally over time, it would be exorbitantly more expensive to try and surgically cut in specific locations and how that might work.
And for anyone, maybe you, Joy, so we're seeing this here tonight, we're getting this as a recommendation, kind of a for sure recommendation, and if we want to tread to this territory recommendation on D. When would we see a next round of a recommendation? I'm sorry if I missed it.
So, based upon what we have tonight and the discussion, we'll frame the final recommendation for next week. Okay? So if the board says, go with just the initial recommendation, that's what we bring back next week. If the board, from the discussion we hear, come back with component D included, then we would have to come back with that recommendation with how we would fund that.
Got it. What I meant was beyond, on a longer
That's
horizon.
what was the question that Jennifer asked about how far out. We would, because this project, what we're recommending would take, as we said, 3 to 4 years to get done. About halfway through, we would come back with a recommendation on the next phase and how to pay for it. So that's where that window of, 14 to 18 months came in. Because then that'd be that same time.
I have a couple of questions. One is to Jennifer's point about talking about our PE spaces. And the questions that I have are, if we're talking about waiting 4 years to begin any type of even design work on the boys' locker room, the PE facilities, I think, what is the administration's recommendation on our current PE program and swimming? Because embedded in that question for me is, how much longer are our pools going to last, and how much longer, and what is the maintenance costs to continue to keep them chugging along over the next 4 or 5 years? Is that a good use of our money?
I can't sit here and tell you that's a good use of dollars. I've tried to articulate why we came forward with the recommendation. We came forward with not to minimize the urgency, but you are absolutely correct. If we don't do something in the PE spaces, I can't tell you how long the pool is going to last. I can't tell you how much those dollars are going to cost. The locker room is in dire straits. The locker room, to me, and I'm looking over at Fred, we could probably get through much, and not in terms of ventilation, much easier than navigating the whole pool issue.
And in the last, I'd say in the last month, we've had 2 issues with respect to the pool. We've had some failures on the ventilation units above that area. In addition, we've had some problems with the lighting. We're going to have to drain the, which of the pools, Fred?
West Pool, but we worked around that, so we're not gonna have to drain it.
All right, so we thought we were going to have to drain it just to get to the lights. I mean, so the pools are old. The building is old, so implicit in this is that we'll do what we've been doing for the last number of years is as things come up, we react to those and we patch them together as best we can.
So, Lee, I'm just going to lay out my position, which I don't think anyone will be too surprised about, is that if we're going to talk about what's urgent and what's in the best interest of our students, then I don't see how we do both, or maybe I need to understand how we're defining urgent, because I do see our, student center, we talked about the commons area from a standpoint of school climate as well as safety, all of the line of sight aspects of, and being able to close off certain parts of the building and have a safer environment for our students. So I see those things as falling into line with what we talked about as the goals for this project. But I guess I really need to know if, if our PE curriculum is a part of our overall curriculum, then we have to give it the attention that it needs. And, health and wellness, in my opinion, is right up there with, maintaining achievement. Kids can't, need to be healthy to learn. And in the same way that kids may not want to take math or a certain history class, yeah, we have kids that don't want to take swimming. Now, I think that the swimming curriculum, I have wanted us to explore, I think, for all of our sports, and I don't know what the rules are, but, if you are a football player or a soccer player or a tennis player, you shouldn't be able to take any of those things as a gym unit, because what are you learning? I mean, it's just, you're already there. And so folks that are on the swim team or diving or synchronized swimming, I could see them not having to take swimming, or maybe they take a lifeguard class, or maybe they, are silks for swimming in a organized way. But I need to understand what our commitment is to our PE program, because it is true that, that part of the building is in dire straits and has been, it's not up to code. When we start talking about ventilation, I can't believe that we are going to say, that we're even considering that 4 years is a time frame to start thinking about it. So I just need to understand what the commitment is to our PE program.
I think as administration, I believe as an administration, we're committed to all of our programs overall. We could have, to your point about urgent, we could have come forward to the board with the sped team spaces, the boys' locker room, the gender locker rooms, the pool replacement, the south elevator, and those would have been those things encompassed under urgent need. And that cost would have come to, let me try to do it real quick, the 65 million plus, plus an additional $1,572,600 for the team spaces. And so then we would be coming to the board with a little over, 67 million. I'm just pulling out the components that are marked urgent.
Right, so the only caveat I would add to that, Joy Lynn, is that the team spaces are predicated on opening up some additional space, which is tied to other components. Redoing the library opens up this space, allows you to do both classrooms, but also allows you to do 2 science labs up in this area, that is what team is expanding into. So if you were to isolate the team program, you'd have to rethink how you're going to open up that space for them to expand, to serve the students in the way that they need to be.
And now those are not, I was just trying to get a sense of, we, continue to avoid talking about the pool that we keep duct taping back together, and, I think Mr. Bernstein, in my opinion, kind of made my argument for the pool with the quoting gave from the swimmers, that, that team building, that was the sport that she was part of, and we want to be able to continue traditions like that, and how it impacts academics. I'm gonna let Fred talk.
Yeah, a couple things. First, I agree with Jackie that we need to have an understanding on our PE curriculum, all right, and what best practices are currently in PE, because we've really never had that. Because I think Jackie was making a couple of the comments that you were making, based on what I've heard about our PE curriculum, really were not relevant, because our PE curriculum today is not about learning a sport or having skills in a sport. More so, it's about wellness and lifetime fitness and a commit to some type of exercise on a daily basis. But I'd like to hear that from our professionals, from the people who are up to date with that. The other thing that I was going to comment on was in talking about the items that are in urgent need. Especially in component D, which is the athletic portion, the south end of the building. And what I've heard from Imagine throughout this process is that there are, those go along with other non-urgent needs. All right, and they can't be separated, because you have to, because of the urgent needs, you have to take down a portion of the building to be able to satisfy the locker rooms, and that's moving lockers. We're not talking about the boys' locker rooms in place. All right, we're talking about actually relocating the boys' locker rooms, all right, because they can't be redone in place. But that also goes on even in this memo. You look at the things that aren't urgent, which would have to do with PE, the offices, dance studio, the competition multi-court gym, and the weight room. So that's all. What I'm saying is that $65 million is not the urgent needs. That encompasses a lot more.
That is inclusive of the urgent
Right.
need, but it goes back to what was said earlier. It is more cost effective to do it because it frees up space, and kind of is that domino effect.
Right.
And so that's why they are packaged together. The other piece I asked Rob to come up, because it is my understanding that if the board is wanting, we were trying to keep the board from going into debt, which is one thing. Trying to keep from going out for the non-referendum bonds and so forth. However, it's my understanding, that's Rob to come up, if we go with component D, which has the urgent pieces to it, and we do this team, which has an urgent need, we would pay for that. We could take it from fund balance, but that reduced our fund balance significantly, or we would have to go out for debt certificates or non-referendum bonds. Am I correct?
Yeah, you have about $60 million to use to not break the 6-month fund balance level, which it could go down to that point, but the Board of Education would need to recognize that bringing it to that level, number one, it would heighten, almost mandate, in my view, the commitment to balanced budget and being able to accomplish that. And then I guess the other part is that there would be no reserves left over unless they're regenerated by surpluses going forward to address any other projects. So that would be the long answer to just a yes or no, do you have the fund balance reserves?
The other piece that, as you saw in the item, is the financial uncertainty. We heard a lot tonight about what could, if the state does this, if this happens with the retirement system, we're still in negotiations. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And so to say to the board, expend this cost with those uncertainties, as the superintendent, I didn't think that was prudent to do. At the end of the day, as I said, it is the board's decision. You asked a question about our commitment to PE. You have heard me say multiple times that physical education, whatever we offer, is also academic. It is a learning process. But I also heard the board say more than once, classroom spaces, ADA spaces. And so not to minimize the need for the PE spaces, but looking at also being good stewards of the district's dollars and how we make this happen. We've heard the board discuss possible flat levies, with the least amount of impact. And so taking all of that into consideration was the recommendation. It was not to minimize the urgency of any one component over another. And if Joylee had a magic wand, I'd say just do it all and we figure a way to pay for it. That's not realistic. I think every single component from sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 has a significant impact on our students. And so, but I don't see how we can realistically, with the uncertainties that we have, say take on all of the components that I think each of us thinks is equally important. And so that's the balance that the board charged us to come with our recommendation. But at the end of the day, for me, it is all important, but I just don't know how we would be able to pay for it all, which was why we also felt important to put that second recommendation, which I said probably should have been after this one, saying charge us now as an administration to go back and figure out a way to get it paid for sooner than later, but being realistic in how we sequence it. It would be coming to you in about a year and a half with a recommendation.
So, I've been silent for 15 months on this, and I've prepared some comments. I'm going to focus on this element here of the pool, because so the Imagine process, one of the top considerations was getting the biggest bang for our limited buck, affecting the most students as possible as a criteria, and it's not the sole, and maxing out on that. And the first segment of the work that's been recommended to us tonight, I feel really does that. The secondary recommendation, I don't feel comes close to that, based on how many dollars we're talking about, based on how it feels like it's a all or nothing almost type of discussion. It's where it's just not fiscally responsible for us to take it on piecemeal. So, in terms of this swimming requirement, and I know a few months ago I asked about, echoing some concerns or questions from the community of, can we explore a path to allowing some capable swimmers who are students to opt out? And the response was that it's part of it's a 6-year curriculum review that this is embedded in, to review the phys ed program and review swimming. And with Imagine being charged with looking to the future and really trying to look out 10, 20 years of and beyond of preparing our students for the future, I am disappointed that we seem to be institutionally holding on to a relic of the past, of a swimming requirement that doesn't make sense anymore. Here's the thing, we're not even looking into it, and we're not even considering a path to that. And to me, that is troubling, that there's just not even an openness to exploring it. It just confounds me. and see where the exploration leads. And it's 180 degrees away from innovative, forward-looking approach to all sorts of, the Imagine team did yeoman's work exploring so many areas, and in this one area, they were essentially, from what I understand, don't look into this. This is not on the table, and I don't get it. And if we do delay 15 or 18 months before exploring this further, I would, ask my colleagues on the board to join me in calling for at least an exploration of that issue, because to me, it's low-lying fruit to at least dig into it.
I would respectfully disagree with the statement that we refuse to look into it. I would respectfully disagree that we are resistant to that. And that's the fact that it is a part of a 6-year curriculum review. I get that. And if the board wants us to move the swimming piece up, but I think it's important to know, when we said to imagine, don't look at the swimming curriculum, that was not their task. Curriculum, as it was indicated earlier, is usually what the educators do. We asked them to look at the facilities that impact that educational environment. Two different things. The other thing I want to say is, even if we did the opt-out, which we could test out, you could do that. That, to me, and I'm going to look to the architectural expert, has nothing to do with the size of the pool. Particularly if we're going to do competitive swimming, and we're going to do diving, if we're going to have multiple activities taking place at the same time. There could be a class where you have, like sometimes in foreign language, we have multiple levels. So you could have where there's kids learning to do the life-saving component, I'm just saying, and there are kids who are doing the other component. The curriculum does not impact the size. And I think that's been a miscommunication throughout this process. When there's comments made that we're wanting an Olympic-sized pool, we've never said Olympic-sized pool. And there's a clear delineation in size versus curriculum. And so to review the swimming component and opt out, that's doable. But that doesn't negate having the pool. Earlier in the process, we said if the board wants to do away with, we need to make a decision, which is a curriculum decision, and a sports and clubs decision, if we're going to have diving, if we're going to have synchronized swimming, if we're going to have water polo, that's a whole different decision. That would impact the need for a pool. But the curriculum, the pool supports the curriculum. It's like a material resource that supports that. So I just needed to clarify that. We are not resistant. It is a part of the process. We can move forward. But that has nothing to do with the size.
Yeah, looking at this situation, the urgent needs, along with the other needs that somehow are embedded with those urgent needs because of constructability, exceed the resources we have. Right off the bat. So that's what prioritization needs to be, and we need to make initial prioritization, while we also need to, in my mind, get some things going from a demonstrated financial competence, I would say. We need to demonstrate our ability to control our costs. Because they exceed our resources, either that means we're not going to do them, or we're going to need community support. Okay? And to get community support, ask for community support, in whatever way that looks, it means we're going to have to demonstrate a number of things. One is demonstrate that we can manage our costs, which we've talked about a lot today. We've talked about seeking, I would say, voluntary community support and demonstrate what that looks like. The one thing we haven't talked about, so as I look at what's being proposed, I like the fact of, I like what you've chosen for the first phase in terms of that being needed project work. I am concerned that, critical needs such as the pool and the boys' locker room are kicked down the road. But we can't do everything. say, if we did proceed with what is on the table, I saw, then what else would be done? And I'd say, one is we've talked about demonstrating financial responsibility. We talked about resources, but we haven't talked about the old, can we look at the south end of the building? Is there a way we can reduce our costs? I don't know. We looked, this is, to me, that's a big piece to the puzzle because it's a big number. And if we don't do that as part of, in that time frame, I think, we're going to the community with a big price tag. It's the grill in the room. That's a lot of money.
Joy Lynn, I'm in administration. I'm very supportive of what you recommended for the reasons that you put out there. I am also concerned about the south end of the building. I'm concerned how we're going to afford to do something. And I think it's the elephant in the room, but I think that, and I don't have all the history that some of you have here with having been through this before, and I understand that. But I just think that somehow we've constrained our assumptions that, and put ourselves in a box that we've assumed so many things about what has to be the same, that the solution that comes out is a $60 million project. And somehow we have to really go back and revisit those assumptions. Now, I think the swim requirement is one of them, but I don't think it's the only one. I think there are other assumptions that were functions of Imagine that we made. I think Imagine focused on how to fit this within the footprint of the building. And I don't think that that's an assumption that we should have, or we could have, I don't want to revisit that. That's an assumption that isn't a hard fact, because there are lots of people with this sporting facilities or PE facilities that aren't located at their site. Now, that's a compromise, but, we're either going to spend $60 million or we're going to compromise. And I'm not ready to support the $60 million until I feel like we've exhausted some of these other compromises that may be more efficient.
I haven't talked to you guys, I'll talk. So I want to thank the administration. I think the initial $32 million, the initial package is sort of a no-brainer. I have no problem supporting that. I'm interested to hear though how the funding would go for the rest of it, the pool, et cetera, the later named aspects of it, before I weigh in on that. Well, so the $32 million from fund balance, I don't have a problem with that, is what I'm saying. But I want more information around how, if we're gonna go to referendum, how we want to handle the remaining components.
Can't answer that totally,
Of course,
but it's some of the things we've discussed tonight about balanced budget. We asked for the 20 million, we're gonna ask from the 20 million recommended from the FAC 2013 be moved to be earmarked. So there's 20 million there. And then we talked about private donations. We can set a goal for that, but you really don't know how you're gonna get there. But I hear what you're saying, but we could give you strategies and processes, but we can't tell you, particularly with the private donations, we're gonna hit that target. But if we don't hit our target, what are other means of getting the work done?
Just in terms of the private donations piece, for example, I think we would need to consult with folks who do private funding.
That is true.
Fundraisers who could help us assess our community and what the capacity of our community and our donors that are alums would come to. But also just in terms of if we do go for a referendum, what the timing of the referendum would be, how much of it would be referendum versus, obviously a lot of these variables are unknowns at this point, so I'm not expecting an answer. But the money has to come from somewhere, so.
I just wanted to, I'm a little confused with, if with the recommendation for the 20 million from the FAC, which to Fred's point, we were doing, way back when. Is there a reason that, setting up a, building or whatever, building fund foundation has to wait for 18 months?
No, that doesn't have to wait. We can get started immediately. We've already researched what we need to do for that. The goal was to be able to, in 18 months, give this initial project time to get up and running. It gives us time to solidify, because we heard the board say, come back with a process for the balanced budget. We set our goal, we do our processes, but when we come back, we can come back to you any point in time and say, this is the mechanism in which we think we can raise the money. But our hope is in 18 months to say, here is the money, and this is how we pay for it. Not saying in 18 months, so now this is what we put in place to get the money, but saying.
So you're saying that private donations will have occurred in 18 months?
Not totally. Our goal is to seek private donations.
Right.
The 20 million.
Right.
Okay, so that's already there. We talked about a balanced budget and underspending. We talked about the levy, all of those together. So we would have had some time with the levy to see where we're going to be. We would have a greater gauge on cost, because costs are going to change over time as well. But we would be able to say to you, this is how we're going to pay for it. Because I think between now and 18 months, we can get a commitment of, I don't want to put a dollar amount, lots of private donations. People are already asking how they can donate.
So I guess the reason I'm asking it that way is because I see that there can be simultaneous processes happening. One being to Tom's point, showing we know how to maintain a balanced budget and being responsible about our projects. But at the same time, we've said on multiple occasions that the way that this could be funded, naming rights or whatever, so starting that campaign, direction that campaign is starting now, so that that process doesn't, have to feel as though we can say, we got the $20 million fund balance, and the remainder we're trying to raise, and we're starting that, and we look at.
Absolutely. We were not saying start the process, as I said, in 18 months. It's coming back to you with this is the project that we want to do next. And right now we're saying that's component D, and this is how we pay for it. And then we say, can we go out for an RFQ to get that done? So we were not saying wait 18 months and come back and say, now this is how we're going to raise the money. That starts now.
Okay, that hasn't been clear. Maybe I just.
So if I can clarify for me and maybe others, the $20 million that we're looking to now go into this capital fund will go towards the initial 32 million.
No,
No.
it's separate.
So the 32 million, the idea is have that come out of the general fund reserves?
Comes out the
Ed fund reserves of 100 and...
line 6, budget 60.
Okay. And so this idea of fundraising though would be geared towards, the initial outlay would be towards
The
this
future project,
D.
yes.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for your thoughtful work on this. It's very difficult. So it's my understanding that we're really looking at committing of our fund balance $52.5 million to capital projects. That we're looking at committing $52.5 million to capital projects.
Yes.
Okay. I think it makes, and I'm where Tom is, I think. It makes a lot of sense to take this 18 months, all right? Number one, to get make sure that our financial house is in order, all right? And number two, to see what is available in terms of raising outside funding or what other funding may be available. We may know what the state's gonna do in some of the risk components that we have in a tax freeze or putting the pension burden back on our local community. So we'll have a better idea of where we're at there, and I think we'll have a better control also of our expenses, and we'll have a good idea of if we're really capable of operating for a long-term at a balanced budget. So I think I am probably the last one sitting at this table who wants to kick this can down the road any further. But I think it makes, at this point in time, it makes a lot of sense to do that, to find out where we're at. I do know, and I'm in the athletic facilities a lot, and I do know the urgent needs there. I also feel very strongly that it is it's a learning space, they're classroom spaces as well. But I've seen those spaces for 50 years, and I know what they were in 1971, I know what they are today. But I think we can get ourselves to a point in 18 months to have a much better idea of what we can and can't afford. It may be in 18 months where we can't afford it, and we have to go back to Perkins and Will or whoever and say, hey, we need plan D, E, F here. We need something else. Here's what we can afford.
And that's one of the key pieces when you saw in the initial recommendation from Imagine, that when you have a long-term facilities plan, you need to review it annually, just to make sure, because it may be at that point that.
Right. And I think going forward, it will serve this district well over the next 50 years to maintain this long-term facilities plan, because I don't think we'd be in this situation with a lot of things that we need had that been done 50 years ago and been constantly updated, rather than just, maintaining and placing Band-Aids on whatever needed to be done. So I'm going to support your recommendation to go forward with $32.5 million. I think those are incredibly important work to, number one, alleviate burdens on our most vulnerable students in special ed. All right, to create that commons area where our kids, and then anybody who walks through this building before school or after school knows. All right, our kids need space. They need common space to be able to sit, to collaborate, to socialize, and it needs to be a very safe space. The kids need the tutoring center. They need the libraries. All right, it needs to be centered. They need access beyond the regular school day. All right, there's no question. You walk into, real simple, walk into the field house anytime at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll see kids sitting in the stands doing their homework, right, because they have nowhere else to go. All right, because nobody's going to shag them out of there. So, again, I thank you. That's where I'm at with this plan.
So I agree with most of what Fred and Tom were saying. I think we do need to demonstrate our fiscal responsibility. I think we need to have a better understanding of some of the uncertainties that Dr. Crowd-Adams was talking about. But I guess where I'm struggling and I'm troubled is some of the other comments at the board table that make me concerned that we're going to, in 18 months, still be waffling back and forth about, whether or not we have a swim program, whether or not we have extracurricular aquatics program on campus. At what point, as a board, are we going to make these decisions so that the administration can move forward with its planning and bringing recommendations forth? I feel like I'm in a twilight zone. Like, we keep having these same conversations over and over, and I thought that the work that Imagine did over the last year and a half was supposed to be providing us with the resource, with the research, and the expertise to tell us, show us, demonstrate to us what our students need in terms of our PE and extracurricular athletic programs. So I guess I just don't know what that looks like for the administration to come forward in 18 months with a plan to pay for a project when we don't have any commitment that I can see from the board that
Fred, when you said kicking the can, I am of the opinion that the reason we're here, and Craig, to your point, and Tom, you were there to the first iteration of these conversations. If there is a place in Oak Park or River Forest, it has been measured, it has been vetted, it has been looked at. Partnerships have been looked at. I mean, we've gone as far as Triton and, in some cases, looking at things in Brookfield to see what they're doing and how that may be something we can do here in terms of partnership. The realities of the square footage of our village haven't changed, and waiting to see if a potential partnership is going to emerge and a piece of land is going to open up and, all of those kinds of things. My concern is that, what I need to understand is what we're saying with what I'm hearing from certain board members is that we're okay, or the board is willing to wait 4 years to address the south end of the building, which has been deemed having the most urgent needs of repair, and continue to put money into stopgap measures. I mean, that's what we're saying. And I'm, in terms of our list of priorities, I see the classrooms. I'm not quite sure certain things that are on there, Husky Pup is probably because of classrooms. I'm not sure how that's.
Space moving,
Yeah.
the whole domino effect,
Right.
to give teams space.
So it is, I really hope that one of the things that comes out of our board decision is that we are saying more than, let's go with 32 million, that recommendation, and revisit in 18 months. Are we giving direction that we are committing to the needs of the PE and athletic spaces? That's a question.
And our way of that second item was asking for that commitment, that we're committing to continuing the work. That's why we put that second item about taking the 20 million and putting it aside. So there is a commitment that we're serious about getting something done.
Well, I'll just say, yeah, I can see 20 million for sure in the south end. I guess Imagine was given no limits, and we're here to set limits that we're comfortable with as a board. I'm not comfortable spending 65 million on that end of the building. So is it that we come to a consensus on the number that we are in agreement over? I don't know. But, so I hear all the comments, I understand them, it's a matter of priority. Craig and I are new to the board, so, Craig bringing an idea up of exploring some other way, maybe something off campus, that's one avenue, it's not the only thing we're talking about. So I'm not prepared today to support $100 million of spending as an initial outlay of a larger plan. It's well beyond the scope. In addition to hearing from Imagine, we heard from hundreds of community members, and there's many more behind them who are, a chorus of concern. So it raises the question, is it feasible to continue to have a swimming pool or pools in this building? That's a question to look at. And if it is, how do we chart the path to have that be within the means that we feel that we are comfortable responsibly stewarding? Or is it not? Okay, I didn't get struck by lightning.
My issue has to do with affordability. I don't believe we as a community at this point in time can afford $100 million. Okay, I've listened, I've heard people, the taxpayers. We don't have obviously we have $100 million in the bank, but if we take and spend all of that, then we're gonna have to go out for referendum. All right, so if we wanna, so the choice is, if we wanna do, component D, at this point in time, we would have to do it, all right, you know, with some additional funds, because we won't have enough fund balance, to keep us solvent. All right, so, which means we would have to go out for a referendum. Now, we could issue non-referendum bonds. I, for one, have been there, done that, and don't want to do it again. I would, if we're going to fund, I think, and we're going to have issue bonds, I think we should do it for referendum, through referendum.
Jackie, I don't disagree with you, Fred. I'm with you in terms of we need to be realistic about what we can afford. My issue is I don't want us to reinvent the wheel and undo the work that we've been doing over the last 4, 5, 6 years. We've been having these same conversations. The research has been done. Maybe people don't like the answers, but the research is there.
And my personal belief is that I think we can raise the money. I think we can go out and raise money. And I think that if we spend the next 12 to 18 months in a sincere campaign, we can put a huge dent, all right, in the cost to our taxpayer.
And I just want to be clear, the question I was asking was about our commitment to the facilities. It was not saying that, you know, this price tag means we take $100 billion out of fund balance. That has never been anything that's never been on the table. And so the commitment I'm asking for is, where do you stand on the need for the renovations? And to Jennifer's point, and I hope it addresses Matt and Craig's question, I don't know, if we keep saying we need to do more research, or there's something we haven't thought of, we're never going to make a decision. And I think the fundraising piece is the most compelling piece to this, but even that doesn't happen if we don't say we want this to happen. What if people are gonna give money for what?
I thought we unanimously accepted the plan. I thought that was a commitment to this long-term facilities plan.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused. I'm sorry, I'm confused. It's a commitment, it's like a moral commitment to this plan. We're not talking about how we're gonna fund it at all, right? We're taking funding out of the equation.
We're also, what I'm hearing tonight is that we're deciding not to decide about certain things that have been deemed urgent.
So hopefully, so there's two recommendations that we're gonna come to you with next week. One recommendation is for the 32 million to do the initial recommended component. The other recommendation is to charge us to commit to, it's really verbalized, written as commit to future projects, charge us to come back. We didn't put the time frame in the document with a way to pay for them. That's the commitment, that if we come back and say this is how we pay for it, then the board commits that they will continue. As long as we can come up with ways to pay and be good fiscal stewards, the board will commit to ongoing projects. So our goal is to come, to charge us, that's what we're asking you to do in the second one, to charge us, to come back with a recommendation on the next section of work and how to pay for it. But to commit, that's the other piece, to commit to levying the max. That's in there. I think that the end result is, for us, as I said earlier, there were so many financial unknowns that this was the way we saw getting the initial work done, and then a commitment from the board to continue to do projects as we are able to pay for them. I tried to
of the, I can't use phase, I can't, whatever it is, the first,
Initial recommended component.
you mentioned the green roof, or something, you mentioned
Right.
some things that were not there.
Okay.
So can you just
Tell you what
clarify
that
any?
meant. It was addressing one of the statements made in public comment.
Okay.
And the public comment was, why didn't we just say sequence 1 and sequence 2?
Okay.
The green roof piece, we heard in the last discussion, really wasn't an integral part. That's what we heard from the board. And so we took, when we looked at what could we pay for, or what could we recommend out of fund balance, and maybe hopefully down the road somewhere else maybe get done, but did not seem like it was what we heard a necessary piece. If we had said, we want to go with sequence 1, the impression may have been that is in addition to all the green roofs. The other statement that was made was, why are we using components? The term components has been listed throughout the sequences. It was clustering the different things that fell into each component. And so we charged ourselves to be consistent with using the word component versus sequence.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit, the master plan, each component is what is deemed as what can be an isolated project that can be completed without, leaving anything undone and untouched. And so the overall master plan has a number of components, and then those were all grouped into sequences for ease of describing, okay, you could do this group for this large amount of money, and the building will be whole at the end of that, and we strung them all together in that.
Is the green roof, my memory is failing, we've decided that it's not a viable thing we want to pursue?
So the green roof, that was something that wasn't deemed as a high priority based on all the community input and the discussion with the board. Now, if we get into the design process, and through the design process, the board or the administration says, well, we want to see exactly how much that actually would be, you could always design that as an ad alternate. When you get the bids in, you say, you know what, the bids came in favorable, we want to go forward with that, or the other option was they wanted to explore, the solar partnership similar to the Park District did. So that was another avenue that people seemed a little bit more eager to explore, and that seems like the more likely avenue that we would go forward with.
And so, for example, initially in sequence 1, if you go back to the sequence, component component BV was a green roof over the Student Resource Center. Also in sequence 1 was component QQ, a roof terrace over the North Cap. Also in sequence 1 was component RR, a green roof over the West Gym. And so we chose not to say sequence 1 because we didn't want it to be implied that all of that was in there. Thank you. Our next item is the presentation of the data framework process and student achievement. And making the presentation is, you all know Greg, but I think officially it's our first board presentation, Crystal Jones, who is our data and research coordinator. This item is for information, and it is in compliance with Strategic Plan Goal 4, Transformational Teaching and Learning Board Goal 1, and District Policy 6:40.